All right, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deborah Archer. I'm a member of the faculty here at NYU Law School, and welcome to the NYU Law Forum, which is sponsored by Latham and Watkins. And this particular program is co-hosted by the Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network. And for months, we were all focused on the allegations against former Governor Cuomo, culminating in his resignation following a report from New York State Attorney General Tish James, which concluded that Andrew Cuomo created a culture of fear and intimidation, and one that normalized gender-based comments and sexual harassment. Much of the conversation that followed focused on the specific allegations against him. And today we want to expand the focus to how so many workplaces, particularly those that hold themselves out as demanding, often also end up being demeaning. We have a great panel of folks here to engage in what I know will be a robust and informative discussion. First, we have with us Christina Cauterucci, a senior writer for Slate Magazine, whose coverage has included issues around sexual harassment and Andrew Cuomo. We also
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Next, we have Deborah Katz. And Deborah is a partner at Katz, Marshall & Banks, where her practice focuses on employment discrimination, sexual harassment, wrongful discharge, and whistleblower claims. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
We have Shelley Ross, the president of the Cure Alliance, a former executive producer at ABC and CBS, and also author of a recent New York Times op-ed on sexual harassment. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Maria Vullo, NYU class of 87, who's CEO of Vullo Advisory Services and former superintendent of the New York State Department of Financial Services from 2016 to 2019.
Great to be here.
Thank you all for joining us. So we're going to get started with a discussion amongst the panelists, and then we will turn to audience questions. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function to post that question, and I'll take a look at those at the end, near the end of our program. So first, reports of toxic work culture, of misogynistic behavior have been prevalent across industries, from entertainment to government to business. This behavior is not new. And of course, these abuses are not new. But what is different now? Why are women coming forward now? And why are people listening now? Maria volunteered to answer the first question, so I'm going to call on Maria to get us started.
Well, look, I mean, I do believe that, you know, there is more acceptability and there's more support for women coming forward. But I think the Cuomo situation, you know, demonstrates, quite honestly, the difficulty that women have, and women survivors and women who have been abused and harassed in coming forward, because of the power structures that are just create, you know, hostile circumstances, not just for the harassment, but for the retaliation mechanisms that existed. And I think one of the things that we saw with the Cuomo situation was in the Attorney General's report, which was calling out the enablers and calling out the retaliators and consequences to those people too. And I just hope from this that those types of actions as well will not be, you know, condoned, and it will provide for more people to be able to come out and speak, but hopefully, you know, less of these incidences occurring in the first place, because I think what, you know, this demonstrates is just the cultures that sort of allow this type of behavior to continue, and the intimidating environments that make it incredibly difficult for women, and particularly, you know, vulnerable people to speak out, because the power structures make the consequences of speaking out, you know, too difficult, not only for their professional lives, but also the type of smear campaigns that might be, you know, played against them. And we're seeing it even, he's continuing to do it. He's continuing to do it every single day, and it's appalling, and more people need to just call it out and and continue to, defend against the type of gaslighting that keeps happening.
If I can add, I've been covering sexual harassment stories for 30 years. After Anita Hill, many women came forward and
Mhm.
bravely, and more women and whistleblowers came forward, much at their peril, but they still did. And that sort of built up and built up till we got to times out, time time up, and some frenzy happened. And I really think we're seeing a swing of the pendulum. I think that people getting fired and action being taken within 36 hours just it caused everybody to pause, and we are still being viewed as angry and bitter and but again, the I think the main obstacle has been enablers. And I think we need to, as part of the solution, look at HR departments. I think that's a starting point.
Speaking as a member of the press, for a long time, news media didn't know how to cover allegations of harassment and abuse, in part because newsrooms were led by men who, set unreachable barriers of newsworthiness that allegations had to reach before they were printable, unreachable barriers of proof, not taking a woman's allegations and narrative of her own experience as partially proof. And when allegations were reported on, they were often done so within the framework of victim blaming and minimization that accorded with the way the rest of society approached these allegations. And one of the successes of the Me Too movement was that a lot of newsrooms began to take allegations more seriously, saw them as newsworthy, and found ways to report on them in sensitive ways, instead of brushing them off as, he said, she said situations that could never be proven, or as, personal business, or possibly somebody just out with a personal agenda.
I'm going to jump in here. I represent Charlotte Bennett, who was the second woman who came forward in the Cuomo allegations. And I raise that because it answers, I think, an important question you've raised, Deborah, which is, what is different now? I worked on Merrier Savings in 1986. I've done this work my entire professional career. What is different now is with the Me Too movement, it's now on the agenda in a way that is undeniable, that sexual harassment is a scourge and that it affects all of us, and the numbers are not going down. And the movement has got to be about far more than just exposing powerful men who engage in misconduct. A lot of that has happened, but there has to be a range of response, from improving the laws, which we see Governor Cuomo did to great fanfare, even though he then immediately violated the laws. But what's different is the societal shift. And unless you have a societal shift, it doesn't matter what the laws say, they just will not be enforced, and people will fear retaliation and will not come forward. So in this case, when Lindsey Bowling came forward and you saw the Cuomo people getting ready to discredit her and smear her, Charlotte Bennett did something that I think we see more and more, particularly people in her age group, where she came forward to support someone who she saw was telling the truth and was vulnerable if she did not lend what she knew. And she began what I see very often in these cases was a private dialogue with Lindsey about, yes, this happened to me. And Lindsey then gave her some courage to come forward. Charlotte then did do a very courageous thing in coming forward, but she also did a smart thing. And Charlotte was somebody who had done sexual assault work in college, Title IX work, and she knew she would not be believed. And Lifetime, she was texting her parents and others about Cuomo's sexual harassment of her, which was why it was so easy to validate that in the Attorney General's report. There was a map of, he's doing this, he said this, he called me in. And initially when she came forward, Cuomo knew she had him, and he did not deny the allegations. So if you recall, the first thing out of the box was, I'm sorry, I apologize. If I ever meant to hurt anybody or offend any, I never meant to do this. And if I offended somebody, I'm terribly sorry. So what happened when he did that? More women came forward because he wasn't being bullying, intimidating person that people feared. So you had victim 3, 4, and 5 who came forward. And then he changed tacks. And I know we're going to talk about this later. But he then began an outright smear campaign where he called in various allies, including his brother, to figure out how to respond to this. And the response was an intimidating, nasty, discrediting response. When it was no longer okay to say, I'm Italian and I'm old, I'm the same age as him, we went to the law school the same year, I know sexual harassment is illegal, and so does he. But that didn't work, that was foolish. And now he's back to trying to discredit the women through his enabler, his attorney, Rita Glavin, and it's offensive and outrageous. But what has changed is women are willing to come forward and support one another. And there's the believability factor as well. So I think that's a significant sea change. And I would just put that forward.
I want to follow up on something that you said in that, and thank you all for all of those responses. And that's what you mentioned about the need for a societal or systemic shift in order for this movement to be about more than accountability. And I want to come back to what the meaning of accountability is and can be. But first, what are the systems and structures that we need to address? Maria mentioned power structures. Shelley mentioned enablers. Christina mentioned how diversity has changed newsrooms and therefore who reports the stories and how they're reported. So what needs to change? What systems and structures have allowed these toxic cultures to develop and persist for so long, especially in government where there is so much press scrutiny?
Well, until women are at the top positions, and many of them, and not just a few, sexual harassment is fundamentally about abuse of power. And if you do not have women paid equally to men, if you do not have women represented in the same numbers as men, you're going to see women vulnerable to economic pressure, which can be sex, but specifically lower income women, women of color, where objecting to sexual harassment may mean not having money to pay for food for your kids. So we're talking about sexual harassment is one form of discrimination, and it's part of a spectrum of discrimination. But until we really address those inequalities, which are structurally built in, it's hard to address sexual harassment. We can put a spotlight on it in any given moment, but really fundamentally, it's about power and seeing more equity in our workplaces and in our work lives.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think specific to government, this sort of power of government, and in this particular circumstance, and also mentioning the press. I mean, there are a lot of things that the press did not report because of some of the enablers who pushed things away from the press by telling the press that certain things were not correct. I mean, for example, the situation with the state trooper, there was a member of the press that had some information earlier. So, again, I'm not being critical of the press, but there were enablers around there that prevented certain reporting of information. But the power and, of Cuomo, there's a lot of other structural things that could be done. I mean, just the way, the structure of state government is in terms of, having an outlet for the women to be able to go themselves. The outlet within the governor's office didn't work. I'll have to add other things, ethics reform and, term limits and all those kinds of things. So when you talk about, was this the other power structure around him that defended him? It was because of his power and his contacts outside and all of the money that is connected to all of that, money in politics. Well, I believe that all of these things are connected to it. And you also want to talk about what happened with Time's Up and what happened with the people that had to resign in that sort of related scandal. That too is about money, and it's about connection to power and all of that. And, nonprofits have had, small nonprofits have difficulty having access to power to be able to get their agendas done. But the ones that have more money, have that access, and then how does that kind of fuel these things? So power is just a corrupting influence, and certainly when it's connected to money and not not having term limits and everything else. And there's a lot of different things, and obviously in the private sector, power and money go together too. And also what Deborah said about, of course, then this sort of one, lack of equality of pay and all those things, is connected to these things in a way that creates these hostile work environments as well in the private sector as well.
How do you address that a governor could surround himself with all pretty girls, certain age? There is an enabler, a female enabler on his staff at the top, and then there's no protection. And the people that are brought in are really the men are what we call old boys club. And I'm just shocked. I mean, there's you know, going back when I covered Elizabeth Ray and Wayne Hayes in the Capitol, I thought I'm going to go through the Capitol, and for every Elizabeth Ray who can't type and is there to have sex with a senator, there has to be another frumpy woman doing twice the work. Um, there has to be some whistleblower, and I actually found a lot. But if you're just going to cherry pick, women who for your staff who you think look like your ex-girlfriend, I don't know how you stop that. How do you get inside that? How do you eliminate that?
I don't know that the problem is, people who only want to hire traditionally beautiful employees, although that certainly is, a problem. But when it comes to the advocates who are tasked with giving people the courage to come forward, protecting them when they do, and enacting that kind of cultural shift, Maria, I thought your mention of Time's Up was really important. These were people who took a specific strategy toward social change that has proven to be inadequate. It failed within a couple years. Their theory was that gathering insiders, wealthy, powerful, well-connected people in their own industries, would be able to force change from within those industries. But when it came down to brass tacks, those people were unable to turn on one of their own because, the personal and professional costs would be too high. Right. So I think what we learned from that situation is, there's more that we have to demand from nonprofits, from lawyers, from these institutions that seem to be one of our best hopes for, helping create new systems for protecting people who allege harassment. And the way to do that is not to choose people who have personal and professional connections that could lead them to make cynical decisions and sell short the women who come forward to allege abuse against somebody who they consider one of their peers.
If I can throw out something that's bold, because Time's Up didn't work. That imploded in 4 years. Corporate sexual harassment training didn't work and is almost considered laughable. I did 5 stories on the harassment in the military with Sam Donaldson at ABC, and we actually got reaction and law. Policies were changed. We changed 5 policies at the Pentagon and had the resignation of the Secretary of the Navy and lots of action. But here we are 30 years later, nothing has changed. I mean, it has, but it hasn't ended. I feel that we need some kind of a Truth and Reconciliation Council, some big out of the box project where women can come forward and put all their nobody knows the scope. Nobody knows the waitress in Denny's, the single mom who has to deal with a manager who is in charge of her shifts, and if she gets the table that gets the better tips. So we don't yet know the scope. We're just scratching the surface and the range, and that, last month we have a new president at ABC News, the first black female president, and you had somebody sort of marched out the door by security, the executive producer of Good Morning America. She called for an external investigation, and the Disney executive undermined her 2 weeks later and said there will be no investigation of who knew what and when, because this was clearly a cover-up. So I think we need to know the scope. I think women need to come forward, and I'd like to see everything tape recorded and made archival. And I think men need to come forward, and finally, when they see the scope, just like in South Africa after apartheid, if men could come forward and say, I get it, and I don't have, this is just a concept that I'm throwing out and sort of free-forming. I don't have all the answers of how it would work, but I think men need to come forward and say, yes, I have behaved like this.
And they're not going to come forward. They think it's just fine. I mean, this is their prerogative of being in the workplace and being powerful people. They see nothing inappropriate about their behavior. And that's where we are. That's why we need a societal change here. Because, men are not going to volunteer for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It's just great for them where things are. I do want to say one thing about Time's Up, and I think it's really crucially important. I mean, I'm tremendously offended and disturbed by the allegations, and it's horrible. I think, Christina, your point is well taken. I don't think you can play both sides and expect to be victim-centered and be the staunch advocates that women need. But I do want to make a distinction between Time's Up and Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, which I think has stayed very true to its mission. It has provided legal representation to many, many women, and it has paid for lawyers around the country who otherwise cannot do this case. And I think it's really important not to let the brand sully what great work is being done at National Women's Law Center by Fatima Goss-Graves and what's being done at Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. And if that's a casualty of what Time's Up and Tina Chen did, that would be tragic. So I think that we do need to look at the fact that Cuomo was a master manipulator. He knew just what he was doing, throwing crumbs to the women's movement and then surrounding himself with them. And it's disturbing, and it shouldn't happen. As a lawyer who does victims' rights work and women's rights work, I think it's crucial to stay in my lane and not think that I can hobnob with the rich and powerful and do their bidding, and they will do the bidding of, or take care of my people. They will not.
Can Time's Up be rebuilt?
I don't have an answer to that. I think they would have to have clarity about what their purpose and mission is and how they're going to go about meeting that mission, which is different than what they've attempted to do. I want to say one thing, Shelley, that I think that there is an excellent resource in the EEOC task force that Kai Feldblum worked on. I think it came out in 2016, but there's a lot of data in there that we actually do know how pervasive sexual harassment is. We actually do know how pervasive retaliation is. And we actually do know the vast numbers of people who do not come forward because of fear of retaliation. There's a lot of good information in there that anybody who's interested in this issue about how to transform institutions, it's important because they address why does sexual harassment be allowed to persist when people are considered so mission critical, the Matt Lauers of the world, the Andrew Cuomos of the world, the people that nobody feels that they can take down because they're so critical, whether in an interfacing way with the public or because they're the rainmakers and they bring money to the organizations. And the EEOC really looked at the issues of morale and turnover and cost. And it is actually very, very costly to keep a sexual harasser in place. And companies, after after the Me Too movement hit, started seeing that the damage to their brand was a cost. And that's why I believe corporations jumped on this. They didn't want to be the next poster child of, we are the worst sexual harasser offender in name your organization, name your lane. But until there is that kind of exposure, it's just easier for companies to keep people in place. And this whole notion of corporate training, I think it's important to understand where it came from, which was the Supreme Court gave companies an out by allowing an affirmative defense to sexual harassment if companies could show that they had glossy policies in place, they did training, and companies did that not because they really cared about eradicating sexual harassment. I mean, maybe some people did, but if you really are committed to those issues, there are lots of things that can be done that just aren't routinely done in corporate America. So we have a lot of check your box training. And the number of cases I've had where people have been sexually harassed during those trainings are legion, you know, where people make jokes and they laugh and it's all, you know, it's all fun and games. But the EEOC task force report really speaks of that there's certain kind of training that does nothing. I mean, if it's not a direct training that actually deals with what your industry is, that deals with the conditions, and that makes it safe for people to come forward, the training is ineffective. So Shelley, I think that this idea of truth and reconciliation is like far, far, far removed from anything that would ever happen. But
Okay.
But I do think
I threw it out. I just want to find a solution.
Okay, but one thing that I think is really important is that companies can do climate surveys, anonymous climate surveys, to get a sense of what people are feeling like in the workplace and where are the pockets of problems. And it's not just about harassment, but companies don't do that because they don't want the data. Because if you have the data and you don't fix it, then you have a punitive damage problem. So, you know, there's a lot that can be done if there's a real will. But as a practical matter, I think it's really industry by industry, company by company. They have a problem and then they address it. A lot of companies tried to do things after the Me Too movement hit, largely because they didn't want to be the next New York Times headline. But, you know, the problem with the New York Times headlines is there became Harvey Weinstein fatigue, which is also a case I worked on. And I would be in touch with the media and you'd have really serious sexual harassment allegations. And they'd say, well, my editor wants to know if he raped anybody. Well, you don't need to rape somebody for it to be a serious sexual harassment problem. And I, you know, in the beginning, the number of calls from journalists saying, well, you know, did the person, you know, and the level of abuse and violence had to be greater and greater. And I think that there was an effort to look at the societal reasons and the structural reasons that this all happened, and everybody latched onto NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, like that caused the sexual harassment. And I think some of that was really misguided. So we can talk about that as an issue, but one of the issues that we talked about in how this panel is called is demeaning versus demanding. And I think there's a lot in that would be fun to unpack with all of you.
Yeah, I was going to sort of say, I was like this, you know, talking about, you know, the question by the journalist, you know, well, did the person rape you? It's like, let's sort of get to, and even the climate, the cultural climate survey that you were talking about, you know, what if you know, you get a job, you know, a woman gets a job, shows up and realizes this entire culture is just not a great culture to be in. And there are a lot of environments like that. And certainly that's what came out. And I think we should hats off to the Attorney General for doing a very thorough report that didn't only identify and for the lawyers who actually, you know, did all that work, didn't only identify the particular and demonstrate, you know, the evidence on the particular allegations of harassment, which were proven, but also the overall culture, because I think that's this question of demanding, demeaning, and those cultural issues, which are, you know, meaning culture of the environment, the workforce environment that contributes to, you know, the ability of the powerful people to, it could be the CEO, the tech, or it could be others, and why men may be in a culture like that, or maybe women who are enablers in those cultures, do things that, and then people don't want to work there. So I think that's kind of a larger question here as to how do we reform lots of different workforces where that's not, and you could be, to answer one of the questions, I think you could have a demanding culture that is not demeaning. I think you could have a place where people want to work hard and do really great work, particularly say in government. You want to do good work for the people and it's demanding because you want to work hard. That doesn't make it demeaning. And I think his BS on that and his people was saying, oh, this is a tough place to work and that's all this is crap. So you don't have to do that.
We have a question in the audience that's related to that, and so maybe we can pause on this issue and try to unpack that a little bit more. One of the audience questions says that the story of Cuomo seems to be an evolution from or including gender-neutral bullying to sexual harassment, and maybe that's part of the reason why it was accepted for so long, because it was first categorized as just bullying and was normalized in some ways. And so how do we move from environments that may kind of normalize bullying behavior and be characterized as demanding or high pressure?
I think, first of all, the bullying behavior, you always bullies choose people to bully that are, you could put in sort of more vulnerable categories. So the men who were bullied are not, the big, the guys that would be right. Exactly. And so Cuomo bullied men who were not the alpha men. And he bullied, sort of the vulnerable women too. So I think that's all consistent with an environment, obviously, that also, included sexual harassment, which was in private places, clearly, but the bullying and all the other stuff, existed. So, but I would like other people to comment on that too, because I think that's what bullies do.
And Christina,
I see two sides to this. One is that the idea of a demanding workplace that leans toward demeaning. This is a marker of elite performance, the idea of a demanding, but you've got to survive the demeaning part. That was established by white men, people who led in every industry for until today and continue to lead today. So that sort of behavior of domination, the insulting subordinates, making people feel less than, these have all been accepted as signifiers of strength. And that particular kind of strength has historically been seen as a necessary quality in a leader, rewarded with positions of leadership. And on the other side of things, the ability to withstand that kind of abuse has been seen as a kind of strength. And there's an idea that only lazy people or weak people would object to unrealistic demands or verbal abuse. And then you arrive at a place where people who have come up in that kind of workplace and indeed survived that kind of behavior resent the suggestion that it should be different because they made it through, so why shouldn't everyone else? I think people will go to really great lengths to protect themselves from the anger that comes with knowing that you've been treated unfairly, which leads them to then deny that the behavior was unfair. We saw this in the Me Too movement with a lot of women, particularly women of older generations who were sexually harassed in the workplace, saying like, well, it wasn't that bad, I made it. And I certainly don't mean to generalize. There were plenty of people who said, I went through it, it was terrible, and no one should have to do that. But I think here lies an opportunity for people who aren't sexual harassers to participate in the creation of better workplaces by saying, just because I went through it and it happened to me doesn't mean that anyone else should have to, and doesn't mean that it's normal.
I'd like to also add that as we diversify leadership, as a female executive at two networks, I really knew that there were different standards, and there are studies done where if you aren't a bully but you have a script meeting and you ask for script changes and the person walks out the door and says, "She really told me off." The perception of things that happen in a workplace when there is a female boss is a real eye-opener. Um, the expectation that your mentoring should be nurturing. I used to hear she's not a nurturer. Well, nobody said that about the male executives. He's not nurturing. There's certain expectations as we diversify leadership that are just impossible standards. And people, I think, so much of what happens in the workplace, I'll throw out this little grenade, really it is a response of your childhood. There's, when you are a boss, there is some parental. If you had, I could almost figure out who had horrible relationships with their mothers or unresolved, and the people who accept, who like the paternal boss, who says, "Oh, give me my morning hug." I've worked with that. I couldn't believe that was an acceptable executive ritual in the morning at CBS. For, give me my morning hug. It was pretty gross. But I could tell the women who, lined up had some kind of, that's about their relationship with their own parents. So I think it's really, really complicated.
I'd like to just inject that there's a structural piece to this too. There's a difference about being in a dynamic, hard-charging environment where there are deadlines and everybody works hard, and a demeaning environment that doesn't recognize that they're real people with real lives. So if you're a woman and you're the primary childcare provider and you have to go home, it's not demanding to say you need to stay and get it done and then treat the person like they're not really engaged or committed to the workplace when they need to go home because they have childcare responsibilities. So again, there's a really important gender dynamic to that as well. And when you create an environment where everybody is supposed to look and act a certain way, it's ignoring a really significant segment of our workforce that has very different full-time requirements at home and at work potentially too. So there's that structural piece to that too. And there's this sense that I think we're all dogged with, which is, you're supposed to be available 24/7 in your work, especially now with this pandemic. It's like, you can't say to your client, "I'm at a movie," because we're not going anywhere. So there's a sense of like, now, and everybody's exhausted, but we're all sort of in that. And I think, the way discrimination law has evolved is there isn't an anti-bullying code. You can't bully based on certain protected characteristics. But if we as a society care about having humane workforces, we need to take a step back and say, okay, the law doesn't do that. Bullying is not illegal. It's horrible. People should not have to endure that kind of indignity. And I don't think I don't really think that there is typically the equal opportunity bullier. I think it focuses on groups and people who are perceived to be vulnerable in certain ways. But maybe that's a step back. If we care about not treating each other in horrible ways in the workplace, then there needs to be more of that, of a code of you can't be abusive in the workplace, but that's not where it is. And to have to, in our cases, have people stand on one leg to say, no, really, this was gender, and have the company come back and say, no, this person really is just an asshole, it makes it hard to prove these cases. So I think that we do need to look at overall when we say, well, it's just a demanding workplace, who's setting the demands? And, with the Cuomo workplace, he's like the single guy now. He's got nothing to do. And he's calling people in. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and other than giving these like briefings and working out a very lucrative book deal for himself, he's like singing to my client. He's walking around, pestering women about what they're wearing, what they look like. the environment was demanding for the people who had to cater to him, not for him. He seems to be living the life of Riley, you know?
Yeah, but Deborah, he was like that before he was single. So in terms of the demanding nature, but I think you've hit on, there's the law, and then there's, what kind of environments we want, or maybe we want to expand the law to address some of these things, because, and one of the things which is slightly different than what you were saying that I found throughout this was very troubling, which was the argument that the lawyers were making that anti-retaliation law doesn't apply once the person's gone, because there's no more, job, dismissal potential. And I think that, that too has to be addressed, because once people, then it inhibits people from speaking out. But I think on the question of the sort of workplace and the bullying and things like that, and maybe Shelley's idea or something along those lines is, beyond really what the law might protect, is, trying to address, some of these issues, because these are the issues that lead to those types of hostile environments, lead to violations. I mean, that's just the reality.
That's exactly what Governor Cuomo did in 2018. He passed the most protective law in the country. And one of the issues that we know from the Me Too movement is this legal standard of severe or pervasive, which was an invention of the Supreme Court. It's not
right, which he took out of New York law. Yeah.
It does not protect most people in most workplaces, because it's a Rorschach test. You have conservative theorists who look at this and say, oh, he only grabbed her 20 times and said these horrible things, not severe, not pervasive. And then you have other judges who say, yeah, this is that. So I think that we really need to address the legal standard, which is not sufficiently protective. Many, many strong and good cases get dismissed. And that's on our
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I want to point out something that you said, Deborah, that I thought was really powerful, which is the structural component of this. I think people want to focus on the person-to-person interaction part of sexual harassment, and how do we change that, and what's the difference between, a compliment and a harassment, in part because it's interesting and it's like a little bit weirdly sexy, I think, for people, and everyone can relate to it. I also think companies want to point to that, because it's not something that they have to actually put resources into. They can just tell people, oh, stop complimenting her on her body. One of the best ways to create environments where people feel empowered to speak out against sexual harassment or leave a job is to give them protections, give them worker protections. Unions are incredibly powerful tools.
Very important.
For enabling people to feel like they have solidarity if they're going to complain about somebody, that they're going to, have protection against retaliation, giving people paid leave, sick leave, parental leave. These are ways to make sure people are able to have healthy distance from their job, so they don't think their job is the one thing in their life and they can't lose it. So they have to do whatever they have to do to keep the job and to please an abusive employer. I think, companies are really excited to spend a little amount of money on sexual harassment training, because, that helps them get a better insurance rate or whatever.
Right.
But they're not always willing to spend more money to create an environment where people actually feel like they're in a position to demand better for themselves.
I'm so glad you mentioned unions, because I think it's really key. Low-income workers, the McDonald's workers, SEAU's Fight for 15 is now, when it first came out, whoever thought we'd have a $15 an hour minimum wage? And now, whether it's because it's good policy, public policy, or whether it's a great alliteration,
doesn't matter,
or latching onto them, we're seeing that. But it is very hard, if you're a low-income worker, to get a lawyer to take your case, even if it's the best sexual harassment case in the world, because damages are measured largely by virtue of what you earn and what you lose when you get fired. And the unions that actually grieve these kind of sexual harassment cases are an equalizer. And so when we talk about how do we improve things, let's fight for union reform. It's really important for workers.
Focusing on the structural changes and coming back to something that you said, Deborah, that was related to the failures of the reporting system. We have a question that says, one aspect that concerns me about demeaning and toxic workplaces that allow sexual harassment to occur unimpeded is they all pretend to have very thorough reporting systems that women should theoretically be able to turn to. Besides changing the culture itself to encourage women to come forward, what changes can we make to the way these systems themselves are structured to make it easier, more acceptable for women to come forward?
Well, you remember after Roger Ailes, Fox came back and their big talking point was, we have a hotline and no one has ever used it. No one has ever called to complain to our hotline about sexual harassment. So I think one of the things is, if you're really trying to understand how serious the problem is, you need many ways to report harassment. And some are anonymous, some are giving various ways to report. But Shelley's point about HR officials, and maybe I'm a bit jaded, but often for me, they put in really nice people who get hammered when they try to do the right thing. And it's usually women of color. And they usually, if you don't become like a tool of management, you don't last very long. And I think that HR departments are really problematic because workers who come to them often wind up being presented with separation packages because they're not happy, as opposed to really appropriate investigation, et cetera. So there has to be a lot of ways. And, I'm not suggesting that training is all bad, but training has to be really tailored to the industry and it has to be taken seriously. And I think the other thing that's important, and it's referenced in the EOC report, is when executives get evaluated and get these gobs of money, they have to be held accountable for whether they're following the law and whether they're implementing what is in their glossy EEO policies of, fair treatment for all people. They probably don't do that. But I also think for publicly traded companies, one thing that would be easy is for Congress to pass a law that publicly traded companies have to report settlements made in this space. They don't have to name the people, but how much money are companies paying? I mean, just any way that we can get at transparency.
That's a good one.
It's a great idea.
Maybe the SEC can do it without a statute. Maybe Gary Gensler can do it without a statute. That would be interesting. They do it by rule.
Also, like government contractors. I mean, there are lots of ways that we can get at putting obligations to look at this. It's just what the will is. And, we had so much energy after the Me Too movement first took off, and then we had the pandemic, and there's been this interruption. Right. But good things have continued to go on, and I think that Cuomo being forced to resign is really a credit to the Me Too movement. It may also be a reflection of the fact that he alienated so many people that he had no allies ultimately. But clearly that's a factor here. But he just was not going to be able to survive these allegations. He could not write off all these women in the way that he tried to do it. And he would have pre-2017, pre-2018. I'm convinced of that. And I sat in the courtroom in the Weinstein case, and I was really terrified that the jury was going to really not credit the victims of rape because they stayed in touch with him and continued to be beholden to him. And, the lawyers in the room, and we've done this for a really long time, we're like, is a jury going to be able to understand that you could be raped on a Monday and go back to the guy on a Thursday and look to, ingratiate yourself or look at scripts? And the jury completely understood that. And I think that that is a testament to what we have learned by women coming forward and sharing their experiences. And it's not just the movement, it's people talking to one another. That just makes the experience undeniable. And, I think that verdict was really, really important. As much as we said going into it, it's not going to be a verdict on the Me Too movement if we lose this case. Well, I think that, activists and everyday women who shared their experience can take credit for that verdict. It wouldn't have happened, in my view, pre that time.
Yeah, I definitely think no one should minimize the impact that the Me Too movement has had in publicizing the narrative that so often follows these allegations of sexual harassment and assault. And with, with the Cuomo allegations, it's like the script that many of us who care about women and care about ending sexual violence and sexual harassment already knew. The Me Too movement introduced that to so many more people. So that when something like the Cuomo allegations happen, we see the script play out. You know, we see the elements for what they are: the discrediting of accusers, the excuse that how could I have known any better? Times changed so quickly. How could I be expected to keep up? You know, the women who come forward to say he never sexually assaulted me. So, you know, how could he have done this? It's become a cliche, I think, for a lot more people since the Me Too movement, that exactly what you're talking about with the Weinstein case, you know, people were able to recognize the little strategic diversions in the defense's narrative for what they were.
But and again, you have to woman lawyer forward in stilettos. I mean, the courtroom dynamics were absolutely crazy. But he, you know, Harvey Weinstein fired some very good lawyers because he was doing a casting call on who his legal team was, and he wanted a woman out there, you know, advocating for him and blaming women and saying, what did they think was going to happen if they came to read scripts in his hotel room? And women were able to differentiate that. But he couldn't in his mind accept the fact that the world had shifted and no one was going to credit that narrative again.
Yeah, but Cuomo did the same thing. Cuomo hired a woman lawyer, right? It's the same narrative. But the thing with Cuomo, though, too, is that, I mean, it did take a while. And it took, I don't know what number would it be. It took 11 women, but it also took a lot of courage of those 11 women and a lengthy investigation that had to be picture perfect in a way, with the outside lawyers, with a full report and everything else. And yes, a legislature and political people that were just like, he had pissed them off so much on so many other things that it was like done. You know, unlike some of the corporate items, right, where it was just like the corporation, because of some other factors, they just say, you know, go. You're gone. The CEO, you're gone. A lot quicker with, although why Chris still there, I don't know, but that's a whole different question. But you know, so this was tougher in some ways and required 11 women to come forward and a lengthy report.
But the report is crucial. You know, I represented Christine Blasey Ford, and you know, and the talking point of the Republicans were rushed to judgment. He's being denied due process, even though it was a job interview. He was not entitled to any other process other than having this come forward. But we didn't have the tools to demand what a robust investigation should look like. Interestingly, Anita Hill wrote something even before Christine came forward about how does the Senate actually look at judiciary candidates and others who have these kind of problems. And I think that what the narrative is always, it takes too long, we can never get at these things. Well, Ann Clark and Kim June did a phenomenal job.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
And I think that it is really the gold standard of, I mean, can Cuomo keep credibly claiming that he wasn't given his day in court? He spent 11 hours talking to them and had lawyers, and he can produce whatever he wants. So I don't think that he can whine in the same way that others whine, even Kavanaugh, even though he's on the court, that he wasn't, you know, rushed to judgment. He wasn't allowed to present his evidence. I mean, we really do have a model of when elected people refuse to step down, well, we can still investigate them. And I think that they did an extraordinary job. And, you know, what is he going to say now that Letitia James had a political bias in having this investigation go forward? He can't point to any of the findings that he's saying are not accurate. So
I mean, he keeps doing it, and now he did it about the November 16th date for the Commisso allegation, and now they came back and said no, they've confirmed a December date. Like, what's the difference between November 16th and December 3 or whatever it is, right? So that he's quibbling about little things and challenging political motives. Of course, he did a couple of reports that had none of this type of investigatory strength, himself. So I'm just, but I guess the point is that it was, I agree that the Me Too movement certainly led, had contributed to, this happening, but it was a lot more for this to actually have him resign. There was
If
a
we
lot
could-
more that got him to resign.
If we could shift a little bit, you both have been talking a bit about accountability and Cuomo
Yes.
being forced to resign in the Weinstein case, the guilty verdict. And so I would love for us to talk a little bit about what does accountability look like in this movement and in this moment? What's the range of things that would be viewed as accountability, or is someone stepping down or losing their job the only thing that can be true accountability?
I mean,
Accountability, in my opinion, needs to start with an admission of wrongdoing that does not have a single excuse in it, which I don't believe Andrew Cuomo has managed to deliver. It's really hard. You sort of touched on this, Maria. It's hard when you're talking about an elected public official versus somebody at a corporation, where there's maybe a board of directors or company leadership that can make a decision. However, we do have political parties. I think political parties could make a decision that somebody who has proven themselves unable or unwilling to responsibly wield power shouldn't be eligible to run for office under that political party anymore,
Yeah, but that's where they didn't proceed with the impeachment and something else, and he has $18 million in a campaign account. So is that full accountability? Doesn't feel like it, again, from a for a political official, because I don't think to me, accountability is what does everyone else do to hold the people accountable, because we can't really expect the people who have committed the acts to be accountable in the way we would like them to be. So the question is, what do we think accountability should be from everybody else's perspective, and creating laws that provide for that type of accountability, right? Or systems that provide for that. And certainly, impeachment processes or processes that, lawsuits and those types of things, civil, criminal penalties and those kinds of things. And obviously shaming and, governmental, kinds of proceedings are things that should be, because it's serious. And because, the people that have been victimized from this have, consequences that, and it's not up to them, that they don't have to tell the world about all the consequences to them. But I'm going to assume that there's severe consequences, and it's not right that somebody can victimize people in that way and affect their lives in that way and not be accountable, at least as equal.
So can we pull it back from these two very powerful men, right? Someone who is holding public office, the nation is watching. Someone who is holds a very high position in a private corporation. What did for the other folks who are in these situations, who work for smaller companies and corporations, what should accountability look like in those contexts? It won't always be impeachment, question of impeachment, removal from office, public shaming. What are the other ways that we can hold people accountable?
Civil judgments. Yes, right. I mean, obviously, if it's somebody who comes forward and is apologetic, you may think differently, right? The person may actually be reformed and may have and I'd be very, I think that would be a good thing. And the person might do some great work to sort of help society in a way. But if the person is not in that category, then accountability should be the same.
I think
obviously there's always mitigating circumstances, just like in anything else.
Not every offense deserves the same response. The response has got to be measured and appropriate, because if it is not, I have clients who don't want to come forward if coming forward means, their supervisor is going to be fired. We want to create incentives for people to come forward so they don't have to endure these kind of environments. And accountability needs to be an appropriate response given the gravity of the harm that's occurred. And in the workplace, that often means some kind of, if there's an assault or there's touching, it almost always means termination, and it probably should. But if there's stupid emails and other things which I don't want to say is, can't contribute to feelings of humiliation for women in the workplace. It needs to be dealt with differently. So I think that we need to be smart and sensible and measured in how we address these issues. And, I do think that there is something important about bystander training and giving individuals who, and men often, who observe behavior that they're not comfortable with, the tools to be able to be good allies and advocates for others in the workplace. So I think there's a piece to that. And that's talked some about in the EEOC report, that companies can do appropriate bystander training. I mean, and it could be really simple, like men sitting around and making demeaning remarks about women, giving men who don't want to be assholes the tools to say, hey, stop that. That's not okay. This is completely unacceptable. I mean, just giving people the ability to be real in the workplace is important, and those tools. So I think that there's a range of things that we can do, but ultimately accountability means, and it's often the press who does it, writing about what's happening, shedding a light on the problem, because that does keep organizations more willing to be in compliance if they feel that they're going to be exposed. And my view is having really trusted journalists who are smart and care about these issues is really crucial. And that's how the Harvey Weinstein allegations came out, and all these others. If Jody and Megan and Ronan weren't so dogged around Weinstein, he had a lot of people, like some of the very best lawyers in the country, storming the New York Times with all sorts of threats. And the journalists stood up to that, and many other stories. So I think it's not one thing, but it's just looking at a really range of tools that we have and a range of strategies that we have to pursue, because this has gone on from time immemorial, and it's not going to change just because we have a moment where we're putting some light on it.
So we don't have that much time. I'm hoping to try to get maybe 2 more questions in. And so for the first one, many of the folks in the audience are law students or new lawyers who are struggling with the question of whether they should work from within oppressive systems or institutions to change them, or work from outside to transform or reimagine those systems or institutions entirely. And in the context of our discussion, what are the trade-offs for working to improve the kind of culture and systems that you all are speaking about from inside the system versus stepping outside and calling out those problems from outside of the system?
Well, to new law students, come and join us. We need staunch advocates and civil rights lawyers, and the work is vital, and it's never been more urgent. I mean, for me personally, my odyssey is I'm the most insubordinate person in the world. I mean, I could not work for somebody and work within a system. I'd get in trouble within a second. So I started my own law firm when I was finished a clerkship and did some other things very quickly. And it was, people looked at it and said it was bold. I looked at it and said I would have been fired if I worked for anybody else. So, you have to follow your passion, do the work that really is meaningful to you. If you feel like you have the capability to withstand frustration and work from within, and you feel like you have that capacity, there's really a need for that. But there's also a need for people who, take risks and do it from the outside. And I would welcome hearing from anybody who would like that work, because it's really crucial work.
I would just say, so I think it's great, and law students are at a great time to, make a lot of very interesting choices. But I would not, the question is framed as if the choice is outside or oppressive institution, and I don't think that that's I wouldn't go to a place that to be oppressive. I don't think that's a good choice, but I think there's a lot of places you could go to that probably need some improvement. And that could be a place where you could certainly lend some assistance. And I certainly think the younger generation has a lot to offer here. And I think can really do a lot from the inside. And I certainly think that we've seen that in all of the ways. I think if you wind up finding yourself in a circumstance, that seems oppressive, I think you just want to find all the allies that you can find, including people on the outside, and utilize all the processes. And, the worst thing is to stay in a place that is, oppressive. And the worst thing is to become an enabler. And I think that's the piece of, I think, some of this story that I know for me is kind of difficult to accept, is sort of the people that just went along with certain things, is the more problematic thing. But I think, it's kind of like, I think about it, about people that, like, my politics are going to be obvious. People in the Trump administration that stayed in the Civil Rights Bureau, to not offer the job to somebody else or something like that. Or, it's like there are definitely people that work in environments because they think that their being there might help even a little bit. And if you're one of those people, you might, because even a little bit of change and a little bit of assistance could be meaningful to even one person or two people in that environment. And hats off to you if you think you can do that.
I just want to focus one last time on HR departments. For 17 years, I worked with HR at ABC News, and they worked solely to protect the company. And I think maybe what's needed, I'm trying to think of, a quick fix and not a band-aid, but maybe what's needed is like an ombudsman type of person in each HR staff that people can go to. I know in the most recent case, it's the same people that are still there than when I was there. And George Stephanopoulos in this one case went to HR, reported that someone was sexually harassing his producer, and the HR said, bring her in, and she never showed up. Why? A female head of communications waved her off and told her that this was going to compromise her career. It's such a hot mess there, but there needs to be some independent person that isn't a hotline, that is not there solely to protect the company, which they all are. Trust me, I saw it from both sides of the table.
I echo that. There needs to be more protection of those people because they tend to be in the company and the employees don't trust them. And even their records are not always protected, from the right from the management. And we also, one other thing I'd mention is whistleblower laws. We don't have one in New York. It's very narrow, and that could be another way of kind of protecting. It's broader than workplace issues, but certainly whistleblower protections are useful in these types of areas too.
So in our last few minutes, I want to ask each of you to answer this question. I'd like to try to end on a positive, forward-looking note. So for each of you, what about this movement or moment makes you optimistic? And do you see that we're maybe on the verge of systemic change here? Got to be optimistic about something.
I'll start.
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Darn it. Should have waited 1 second longer.
Go.
I am really encouraged by what I've seen in response to the past 18 months of working from home among, people who are lucky enough to be able to work from home. There are people, workers are now demanding more for themselves in terms of better pay, better benefits, better work-life balance, more flexibility. As we were discussing before, I think those things can be really powerful tools for creating a workplace culture that gives workers more power and gives them the ability to have um, a sense of self and a sense of, I don't want to say community because workplace is a workplace, but a sense that, they're human beings first and workers, or valued to their employer second. Um, as far as sexual harassment goes, I mean, harassment can still happen over Zoom, clearly, and Slack. But I think if you're, looking at it from the perspective of a cultural shift, that to me seems like a great first step. As we come out of the pandemic, this new confidence that a lot of workers have seemed to have in terms of demanding more from their employers.
I would like to say thank you. I agree with that. I would like to say that the only feeling of optimism that I have, having just written a big expose that was published in a full page in the New York Times, and nothing happened. It went viral. It was all over the world. Taipei, Sierra Leone, all the Google alerts. It burned up Twitter on the Friday night, and nothing changed. CNN ignored it. The CNN chief media correspondent was compromised, and he ignored it. My big sense of optimism, having experienced sexual harassment in the workplace with starting 41 years ago. My first boss was Roger Ailes in television. My last boss was Les Moonves. And in the middle, I worked with Chris Cuomo. So I really won the lottery there. And I really can say that it's better, it's better, it's better, but my optimism is going to be cynical, because I'm going to say my optimism is eventually these guys will die out. We're going to have to wait until they die for things to really change. For Jeff Zucker to, not have a word about Chris Cuomo and his not only in this secret, journalistically unethical advisory position with his brother, when all he had to do was take a leave of absence. And to sit there and say, I've always cared deeply and profoundly about sexual harassment. I just think if nothing, there wasn't anything on the Richter scale there. And then the one woman that we learned about after my editorial was that Chris Cuomo's EP complained that she was so bullied and harassed, she begged to be she got transferred to digital, to a less prestigious job, so she could still have a paycheck. And I feel terrified for her. But I think these people are just going to we're going to have to wait for retirement, death, and generational passing.
Well, Shelley, I appreciate
Sure,
it. Thank you
yeah.
for sharing your story. I hope that you all will take me up on this offer to come spend some time at NYU Law School and find the hope there. Our students are phenomenal, and they are fierce, and they have no patience or tolerance for
Yes.
this kind of injustice.
And that's why we are optimistic. It's this.
Right, and I'm
Yeah.
optimistic.
And
Right,
that's what I was
and the
saying.
young people, that's what I was going to say.
That's right.
Michelle, and also your client, Deborah, she gives me optimism.
Yep.
Women.
Right, the
So
young women.
unfortunately,
That's
we're
what
out of
I'm
I want to
optimistic.
have a shout out. My daughter-in-law is a fairly recent graduate of NYU Law School. And she brings me tremendous optimism. So I'm optimistic in what's coming up, but I've been in sort of the hot mess for it's
long time.
40 years now.
I got to jump. Thank you for including me. I have a court call.
All right, so we have to jump. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the folks in the audience. And we hope you will join us again for a future forum. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.